Do you know if there's been any word on when What We Left Behind is
Gonna be
available
released.
for anybody? Yeah.
I haven't heard anything. I've just heard that when it's going into limited release in the theaters.
Hmm. Yeah.
So yeah. With that, we are live for episode 89, I believe. I'm like super excited to talk about some Star Trek today. That
Yeah.
being said, Bill, how are you doing this morning? And what are we talking about today?
I'm doing really good. Doing well. Really excited to talk about this topic too. We're going to talk about the areas of Star Trek that we wish there was more of. Like, what parts of the timeline, what storylines we'd like to see uh, explored on screen more than they already are. So this is like, unlike the last few months of our conversations talking about like very definitive episodes. This is much more broad, and that's why I'm excited for this topic. Like we're talking about speculative stuff, headcanon stuff, like what interests us as fans, what parts of the Star Trek, uh, grand storyline, speak to us, and what do we want more of? I think that kind of maybe reveals what kind of fans we are, like what makes us tick. And same for everybody else out there. If you're in the chat and you're watching and you want to share your parts of Star Trek history that you want to see more of, more explored, we're very interested in hearing what sorts of ideas people have. We got some good feedback on Twitter as well. So yeah, really excited to dive in.
Yeah. Before we dive in, how's your rewatch going?
Pretty good. I watched 4 and 5 in the last couple of days.
Nice.
Hoping to watch 6 later today to finish off the TOS movies. Star Trek 4 is a classic. Obviously, it was one of your picks last week.
Yep.
For our Desert Island Star Trek, and that's a really good choice because it just freaking works really well on every level. It's got an emotional punch to it. It's got a message that I think pretty much everybody can get behind, and it's consistently really funny. Like it covers the bases and checks more boxes than most Star Trek does, with the humor element working on all cylinders. Um, and then Star Trek 5 is a little bit more problematic, of course. We've talked about it before on the show. If you go back into our backlog, we have episodes where we cover some Star Trek 5 stuff. But I appreciate some of what Star Trek 5 is trying to do. I think it's got a good heart. It's got some good moments in it. There's scenes that work for me. I even think some of the visual stuff works. I think some of it's fairly well shot, I guess.
Yeah.
But it definitely struggles. It takes a long time to get going. I don't think it has a particularly satisfying ending, and it just kind of is there. It's not up to the standard that some of those other movies I think achieve. But yeah, really enjoying it. I'm excited to move into TNG hopefully in the next week. John Jones says row your boat. Yeah, absolutely. I experienced that yesterday again, and that's actually the campfire stuff works for me. I know that's your mileage may vary. Not everybody loves that, but I think it's fun and charming because I like the characters as much as I do, and I don't mind hanging out with them in a more casual, like less high stakes situation. But it's a double-edged sword. Like I just said, I think the movie takes way too long to get going. I think by the time they're like off and running and have a mission to accomplish and a place to go, we're like 25 or 30 minutes into the movie almost, and I think that's an issue. And part of that is that row your boat scene, the campfire. Like that's what makes it take so long to get there, which I kind of enjoy in a vacuum, but I don't think it's necessarily helpful to the movie. So it's a frustrating movie, to say the least. But it happened. I watched it again for a movie that I struggle with. I've seen it a lot of times, so I'll give it that. I keep going back to it. What about you? Have you watched any?
Yeah. I'm halfway through Bloodlines. That's episode
Man, you're almost done.
22 of season 7. Toughest episode to get through. I kind of started it late last night, so no. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of things to wrap up that they're trying to do with Journey's End and Firstborn and so on and so forth. So, yeah, I'm definitely getting down to the nitty gritty of it.
You're in the nitty gritty of the seventh season. It kind of comes and goes in this pattern. I feel like there are a lot of episodes that have this heavy focus on family, like exploring the family lives of these crew of the crew. Earlier in the season, you had like Interface and Inheritance with Data's mom, and even Sub Rosa with Dr. Crusher's grandmother. Like it's very much leaning into that, like who's in the backstory of these characters, who are their parents, who are their grandparents. You know, what's the family dynamic like for these people? And you kind of hit a 3-episode run in a row with Journey's End, which obviously focuses on pretty heavily Dr. Crusher and Wesley Crusher, wrapping up that story. Firstborn is about Worf and Alexander, and you know, Alexander's path in life and how Worf, you know, feels about where Alexander's going, kind of person he's kind of becoming. And then Bloodline is obviously about like this kind of long lost love in Picard's past, and you have Worf's brother from Goodfellas, John Jones says, and Homeward. Season 7 does a lot of that, and this is like a really condensed period towards the end of the show where they're kind of hammering that idea again. It's kind of unusual in Rick Berman era Star Trek, especially, particularly not. Well, I guess some of the later Enterprise stuff, 3 and 4, those seasons have very distinctive kinds of personalities and have very thematic, like, through lines. But season 7 of TNG kind of stands alone in that respect for TNG. It's like the one season of The Next Generation that you can kind of point to and say, like, that's what that season's kind of about. Like, there's a defining trait that is there through a large percentage of those episodes. Do you find that since you're in the thick of things with season 7 and you're getting ready to be done, and we're going to talk about this fairly soon, I'm sure, like as TNG wraps up, so I don't want to get too far into it, but like, is season 7 working for you? Do you like that thematic approach to having that kind of backbone as opposed to more all over the place and less definable?
I mean, I think it's definitely like a product of the time. I feel like a bunch of stuff is moving towards that kind of more thematic, more dramatic TV. So I'm kind of glad that they kind of explore that. Some hit, definitely. Some work for me. Some are just
not so much.
Yeah. So I'm giving them props for, you know, trying and kind of going somewhere different in season 7. And I think, you know, I mean, it definitely goes into a factor goes into it. You know, this is the show's ending. They're definitely
right.
This is their family, even if, you know, they did have movie deals lined up after this. But it is definitely kind of refreshing to kind of see TNG go this direction late in the series. So
yeah, I would agree. I appreciate the focus on the characters, like the kind of taking the opportunity to go, this is our last 26, and like let's really put our stamp on the characters specifically and try to explore who they are. Like you said, it varies in degree of like success.
Yeah.
Degrees of success. Some of the character development really, I think, works pretty well, and I think it pays off, and some of it is a little bit more problematic. But I do appreciate that they tried to do something a little different and put such a stamp on like the identity of that season, as opposed to the previous more successful seasons are a little bit more all over the place as far as like what they try to do, the genre, the genre of the episodes, the types of stories they're telling, is the Swiss Army knife idea, where it's very much, you know, all over the place. They do westerns, they do character dramas, they do action adventure, they do, you know, weird sci-fi, they do all kinds of stuff. In season 7 it tends to be a little bit more one direction, I guess. So yeah.
Yep.
But I'm sure we'll talk more about TNG in the next couple of weeks as you wrap it up and I start diving into it.
Yep.
We're going to be at different ends of that spectrum. It's going to be very fresh for you, and I'm going to be going into it. And then we have Picard coming at the end of the year, so the TNG coverage on Trek Live will be hot and heavy, I'm sure, as we move through 2019 towards that new show. Cool.
Yep.
So let's dive into the topic of the week.
Do it.
We're going to talk about, like I said at the beginning of the show, if you're coming in late or you're just popping in now, We're going to cover our points along the Star Trek timeline, storylines that we want to see explored more on screen, that we wish there was more of. What's first on your mind, Dan?
First on my mind, because I was kind of in TNG land at the time, I thought of the warp speed limit from TNG, and we kind of talked about it in past episodes. So I'll just do a quick spiel on it. But
sure,
they open up this really big can of worms that kind of could affect the rest of the season and the rest of Trek with this speed limit and how it was, damaging, ripping holes in subspace. So. It's interesting to see it kind of dwindle down. The first episode. I mean, there was maybe first couple episodes of maybe a mention of Starfleet has given us the okay to break the speed limit, and then episodes after that it was like okay, warp 5. There was no high warp before. It was like warp 7. Let's go. It was fast, but I'm curious to see how that kind of changes throughout the rest of the season if they just forget about it. But yeah, I feel like it could have been a cool thing to explore because I don't know. It would be cool because I feel like warp speed is such a staple of Star Trek. It would be cool to see that kind of explored in different ways. So
yeah, I mean, the weird thing about that is that it's such a potentially groundbreakingly ground shaking, like shaking up the entire universe kind of plot development. To take this thing that is sort of the defining characteristic of Star Trek, warp speed, and limit it and make it a problem to have to deal with. The idea is, I think, sound, I guess. Like it'd be a cool thing to play with dramatically. I think in a more modern show like Discovery, this type of story Discovery is trying to tell, and the more modern approach to TV with serialized storytelling, and that approach, I think something like this would be more attractive of an idea, and it probably would have paid off more. But with the episodic backbone that TNG had at the time, and Star Trek in general had at the time, I think it became very difficult for them to kind of grapple with this idea and have to sort of keep pushing that idea forward in these different episodes, different stories where they're tackling completely different issues. To have to fill the audience in on this warp speed problem. I think. They found, I guess, problematic, and that's why they kind of left it in the dust. Like you said, for the rest of season 7 after that, because this happens in season 7 of TNG, they occasionally will drop a line about, we're gonna. The Starfleet Command said we could forgo the speed limit, break the speed limit.
Pop the cherry on the top of the hood, and
yeah. There's very little there, and I think that's kind of an interesting thing too. The idea of tackling something like that as the series they're working on is finishing, but other shows are kind of happening. They know they're developing Voyager, Deep Space Nine's happening over here in the corner. I think it was probably a misguided idea to start something like that without the ability to, potentially pay it off, and then to potentially saddle the other shows with it as well. Was not necessarily the most forward thinking idea. Penske File says the speed limit doesn't add much narrative drama. Only adds a level of we need to get Starfleet to break the limit on, or deciding if a mission is worth breaking the limit for. Yeah, I mean that's kind of what I guess. That's ultimately what it ended up becoming. Yeah. But in a more modern storytelling sensibility, I think there could have been a cool story to tell there. That maybe over the course of a season or a series, they're tackling this problem, and it's something that they could play with over the course of an extended period of time and solve the problem, hopefully. So it's unique in that it's such a huge concept that is striking at the heart of like what Star Trek is, and it's something that they use every day, and I guess that's the point. It's something you take for granted that is kind of being curtailed, taken away from you a little bit. I like the idea of that conceptually, but very, very difficult to pull off dramatically in an interesting way. So yeah, I wish in a different alternate universe there was a cooler way to explore that idea.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely an interesting choice.
What's your first element that you like to see explored?
The one that's in big bold red letters for me is essentially, the back end of what Enterprise would have been. The Romulan War, the founding of the Federation. There's so much meat on the bones in that era because, it's something that I think that show is sort of building towards. So there was like something being teed up already, which is what makes me want it even more than maybe even some of these other ideas that are a little bit more abstract or less defined. But I would have loved to have seen, how the Romulan War helps pave the way to the founding of the Federation. How does it further the relationship between the humans and the Vulcans and the Andorians and the Tellarites? Like what sorts of bumps in the road were they going to have to overcome together to get to a better place to put the pieces together to form this right. thing that's going to last hundreds of years and be the defining characteristic of that part of the galaxy, the defining organization, I guess. I think there was a lot of dramatic potential there that could have been a real successful thing in Star Trek. Just unfortunately cut short. The one thing that I could that would have been a challenge, I think, is especially at the time when we're at this point in Enterprise history, going into the potential 5th season, say, like in that year, 2005, 2006, Deep Space Nine wasn't that long ago, and Deep Space Nine had already kind of done the war thing with the Dominion stuff. So one of the challenges that Enterprise would have faced going into this storyline would have been to take a different approach and not just kind of revisit old ideas that Deep Space Nine kind of already covered with the Dominion War.
Right.
I would have hoped that, and I think they would have had the tools to do it because of, it's a different time, there are different challenges, different species all involved, and different storylines to explore right. in that war setting. But it certainly would have been their challenge to very successfully told. Mm-hmm. But I wish they would have had that opportunity because I think it would have led to yet another big idea with the founding of the Federation that I also would have liked to have seen explored. So those two big like points in Star Trek history in the Federation timeline are the two big ones that I really wish we would have gotten something from.
Yeah, I totally agree. I have the founding of the Federation on my list as well, and I'll do a quick thing. I think that with the Federation is such a staple of all of Star Trek, besides Enterprise, I think I feel like it has to be explored. It's just begging to be have a show or a few episodes to kind of see how it plays out. But yeah, that's another one of the elements that I wish we could have seen explored for sure.
Yeah, I just think if executed properly, you have because it's Enterprise and you have the legwork already kind of done. You have Archer and you have the crew and you have T'Pol and Saval representing the Vulcans. You have Shran representing the Andorians. Like you have big, meaty, satisfying characters coming from a lot of these, big players in the forming of the Federation. These species that are the linchpins and the pillars for the organization. Then you have the Tellarites. You don't necessarily have a character, but I think it would have been cool. Maybe that's a character you bring in, and we get to know over the course of the Romulan War. Like you get to add a character there to represent the Tellarites and be a satisfying, recurring character. If you have that, now you have really, I think there's some really cool opportunities there to kind of have a gateway into the forming of the Federation through those characters, representing their respective species. Pensky Files wants a series to expand on why it is appropriate to give a Ferengi umox in public. Pensky Files. This is a PG-13 at most Star Trek live stream. So I would be interested in that series too, but I don't think we're going to talk too much about it in detail here.
Yeah, maybe a Trek After Dark.
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah. What else do you have on your list?
Yeah, I'll go with my Voyager pick. The episode is One Small Step. I'd love to see like that anomaly and specifically John Kelly kind of explored a little bit more because I feel like that was kind of a cool idea This thing picking up things and traveling across the galaxy, and John Kelly, I feel like is such a great character, and I guess it would be cool to see that explored and see how he got there and see what he went through and more of that anomaly and what that anomaly's, where that anomaly's been and stuff like that. So that's something that came to mind as well for me.
Yeah, I really like that episode a lot. That's in the upper echelon of Voyager for me. I love the moment when he's in the anomaly and he realizes that he's surrounded by debris from structures that are not from Earth. And that's kind of his there's more going on out here. Like confirmation.
Yeah.
There's some really cool stuff there, and I would have liked to have seen more from that storyline, and see what happens to John Kelly. Because he evidently he dies obviously on the shuttle, but what's his experience like leading up to that? That's definitely an interesting idea and a great episode that I think does leave you thinking a lot about what else was going on, like what more happened. It's definitely a really cool pick.
Yeah,
and it's cool because it ties into Voyager for sure, and it's something that is kind of like the Nexus. Like it's this thing that's flying around the galaxy over hundreds of years, and it can be at any point along the timeline. But it also is kind of neatly tucked in. Like that idea is tethered to that very early space exploration, like way before, like closer to us than like Enterprise even, or Zefram Cochrane even, kind of idea. Which is cool.
Yep. What else is on your list?
A smaller one that I've always kind of been curious about. I just watched Star Trek 4 the other day, yesterday, and I'm always interested in Saavik. I know longtime Star Trek fans who I can't claim to have read the novelizations, and I can't speak firsthand on it, but I know there's a lot of talk that people assume Saavik is pregnant in Star Trek 4, being left behind on Vulcan from her Ponfar experience with Spock. That was in early drafts of the script. Apparently, it was something that they were very much kind of toying with in the development of Star Trek 4. I would like to know what happened to Saavik. Why she got left behind on Vulcan. She's still a Starfleet officer. She, she's an interesting character to me. She's cool. I think even her background, and yet another thing, kind of like the pregnancy thing, wasn't ever done on screen, never really confirmed in any kind of official capacity, but in the novelizations and drafts of the script, evidently it was an idea that she's a Vulcan Romulan hybrid, not just a pure Vulcan. I think that's a cool idea. So just more, I'm interested in that character, and I'd like to see more, development of her background and what happened to her after she got left behind on Vulcan.
Yeah,
so,
that's
a small one, but
it's still a great pick, and I think it didn't come to mind for me, but I think it's definitely a great pick. I mean, the character obviously has the groundwork and the layers to make great storytelling. Obviously, maybe we could see a Spock Jr. I don't know, but I think it would be a cool idea for sure.
Yeah, no, it wouldn't have come to mind for me either. I don't think, if I hadn't just watched The Voyage Home. I think the recency of just watching that, I think, kind of dragged it to the front of my mind in getting ready to do this. But Robin Curtis or Kirstie Alley? Kirstie Alley for me. I think she's a better character in the Wrath of Khan. But I think Robin Curtis is fine. I think she's less useful in the search for Spock overall. Like I think she's less of an interesting character in that movie, so I don't necessarily blame. I don't think it's Robin Curtis's fault. I don't think she does anything necessarily wrong. I just think she's better used as a character in the Wrath of Khan, and Kirstie Alley has better opportunities. What do you think? Which actress?
I have to do Kirstie
plays
Alley.
Unusual Star Trek. Yeah, Kirstie Alley.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely an anomaly.
But both, I don't have any issues with either. But
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe because I grew up on it and I never was an issue for me. I just, because it was like ingrained in my head as practically an infant that both of these actresses are Saavik. I just took it for granted, and I never really looked back. So it's just a natural for me. But Kirstie Alley for me, if I had to pick one. Yeah.
Yep.
What's up for you?
Next for me, we're going back to Enterprise. I'd like to see a little bit more, answers, a little bit more explored about the temporal Cold War. And I feel like that kind of goes in what you're talking about with the ending of Enterprise. I would love to see like a little bit more answers of, who was the guy,
future guy,
and how many parties were involved in this war and stuff like that. So I think that to me is one I'd like to see as well, because I feel like there is a lot of meat left on the bone for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the interesting thing about Cold War to me, temporal Cold War, because it's on my list too. Like I said, I'm definitely in my wheelhouse. Yeah, and I think it was probably the right choice for the show, and it makes it an interesting idea. Is the temporal Cold War we only see through the eyes of the characters in the 22nd century.
Yes,
you don't know anything about like what's going on the other end of that spectrum. Like, what's Daniels coming from? Who is future guy, and what's he doing? What's his agenda? Where's he from? Who is he? Like, all of those questions are completely unanswered. We only know what pretty much Archer knows. So, and I think that was cool for the show to do. But yeah, I mean, there's a natural curiosity about, what it looked like on the other end of the spectrum.
Right.
What it looked like on the battlefield, and it's a Cold War, so there's not like a literal battlefield, but on the other end where it's more actively being, dealt with.
Yeah.
We were just kind of on one, platform along the way in Enterprise. So just more context would have been cool to see, somehow, some way, and I'm certainly interested in that.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, definitely a good. Was future guy Archer? I don't know. If you watch the Enterprise bonus features, Brandon Braga says that in his mind they were building to it being like a future version of Archer who is trying to manipulate the timeline somehow. I don't. Who knows? I don't personally think that makes a whole ton of sense if you're watching Broken Bow, for example. But it's a show that was cut off short, and if they were actually going to do that, they had seasons. If they were going to go 7 to throw more layers onto that and play that out a little bit more, maybe it would have made more sense. But that's what Brandon Braga says these days. But I remember back then he was very coy about it, and he didn't know. And I think he wanted to. I think the real idea at the time was to make it vague, and I think they liked the idea of this massive thing being played out somewhere else in the timeline, and that the audience is in the same position as Archer, not knowing what the heck is going on, and you're just kind of a spectator on the sideline who's occasionally getting sucked into it and having to deal with it, as opposed to like in the actual fighting of the battles. So, yeah, Discovery may get into it in season 3. You never know. I think we're a little further out than even the temporal Cold War was being fought. My math is correct, but it's something they could toy with for sure.
Yep.
I'll throw one in real quick.
Okay.
I've always been really interested in just the whole post Star Trek 6 timeline, post Klingon peace process.
Yeah.
I think there are a lot of implications that a lot of hints that like the Romulans aren't going to react well to this. What's the galaxy look like as the Klingons and the Federation are starting down this road to peace? We get some windows into that process, and further down than like where I'm thinking like real post Star Trek 6. But the Worf's father, Moog, was killed at Khitomer, which is the same place that we see at the end of Star Trek 6, and the Romulans were involved in that. So you get a little bit of like Romulan subterfuge with the Klingons and the Federation in TNG, but I think that's a really interesting period of time that is really left unexplored. We have that very little teeny window into that period, I guess, in the very beginning of Generations, the little prequel with Kirk on the Enterprise B. But other than that little 10-minute segment, everything from Star Trek 6 to Encounter at Farpoint is pretty much a blank slate. And all we really know is that at the end of Star Trek 6, there's this desire to have peace with the Klingons because of everything that happens in that movie. And at the beginning of Encounter at Farpoint, we've kind of gotten there to some extent. So filling that gap a little bit would be interesting for me, for sure. And, what are the ups and downs of that process?
Yeah, this is on my list as well. I wrote down, how do we get from, peace talks to, there's a Klingon on the bridge, or there's Klingon on the bridge of a Federation ship,
Right.
It's
exactly.
It seems like almost like a 180, so I think there's a lot to explore, and because it's not just going to be a flip of a switch with the Klingons,
right.
obviously. So I think it would be cool to kind of explore that, maybe some backlash towards the Federation, and so yeah, I think it'd be cool.
Yeah, I mean, Star Trek 6 is all about like the difficulty to even get to the point where you can start talking about with like these long-standing feuds and long, deep divisions between these two cultures. So you have to. Star Trek 6, I think, clearly tease up that this is not going to be an easy process, that not everybody sees things the same way. Not everybody wants peace. Not everybody is prepared to start going down that road.
Right.
And I think that offers a lot of possibilities. And people on both sides are reluctant to explore this idea. The Federation has as many skeptics as the Klingons do. And at the beginning of Star Trek 6, Kirk is one of them. Kirk doesn't really buy in.
Yeah.
So it's a really cool idea. I think Star Trek 6 really tees up some fascinating possibilities for like serialized kinds of storytelling that would be interesting to see play out somehow.
Mm-hmm.
And it's such a wide berth of time too. We're talking like 70 years between Star Trek 6 and Encounter at Farpoint. So there's a big
gap.
Yeah, we're not talking about like a decade. We're talking a long time where a lot happens. There's whole generations in there who see things and do things that lead up to the 24th century of Star Trek that we kind of really dive into and know a lot about with TNG, DS9, Voyager, that era. So yeah, that generational gap between Kirk and Picard is interesting to me.
Last one I got. I'd love to see. I tried to figure out something with the Kelvin timeline. I'd love to see some George Kirk action. I feel like he was such a brave character. Like, how did he get to where he would put his life on the line for his crew and stuff like that? So maybe early George Kirk. It would be cool to see maybe some romance. With the mother, obviously. So yeah, I would love to see some George Kirk action.
Definitely a cool idea. The Kelvin timeline's not something I was like. I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about that in this process, but now that you say it, that's a great idea, and I really like the idea of just kind of exploring the gap between what happened on the Kelvin and like what we jumped to in Star Trek 09, like from the Federation standpoint, from Starfleet standpoint. I think the whole concept of the Kelvin timeline is pretty much that, that happening to the Kelvin is the pivot point for everything to kind of change. People's destinies to change, and we're on a little bit of a different path. And exploring what's the chain reaction of what happened on the Kelvin. And I think Star Trek Into Darkness even kind of tries to play with that with, Starfleet starts down this dark road of Section 31 and subterfuge and like doing dark stuff, and admirals like Marcus get to power because of the experience of the Kelvin and having Vulcan go away, obviously also, but these things happening have kind of put Starfleet on a path that isn't good. and seeing that start to happen, I think would be cool to see that. It does, because the Kelvin timeline, I think, is a cool idea. like the Kelvin timeline a lot. I like all three of those movies, shockingly to some people, in varying degrees. But I like that period in Star Trek, but there's so little of it. It's just 3 movies.
Yeah.
For such a big idea, there is a lot of unexplored territory. Like what sets these characters off on slightly different paths, and what Starfleet on a different path. Let's see that play out a little bit. Yeah. So that's why I was actually when Discovery was announced and we didn't know what they were doing and what it was going to be and what it was going to look like. It wasn't called Star Trek Discovery yet. It was just a new Star Trek show. And all for months and months and months, the whole debate was: is it Prime timeline or is it Kelvin timeline? And I felt like a guy on an island saying, if it's Kelvin timeline, it's not such a bad thing. It'd be cool.
Yeah.
We get to do all these things. And I still kind of feel that way. I'm happy that Discovery and the rest of Star Trek are kind of playing in that Prime timeline for sure, but I'm not opposed to going back to the Kelvin timeline at all.
Yeah.
One other real little thing I'll just throw out there, two actually. I wrote 2 down that are smaller. Like I don't have a lot to say, just little things that I would like to see. I'm interested in. I love the storyline of like the Bajoran occupation, the Cardassian occupation of Bajor. I'd like to see the beginning of that. Like, what is
the invasion look like?
Yeah, like the soft invasion of the Cardassians coming in and like seducing the Bajorans into thinking, "Oh, this is going to be good. We're going to take care of you," and it, kind of going to crap. I'd like to see that. We see a lot of through flashbacks in Deep Space Nine, and a lot of talk about like what the occupation looks like. I'm not as interested in seeing like the occupation and the nitty gritty. Sure, it's like some character, like I think we've talked about in the past. Sure, I'd love to see like a story about young Kira, obviously, like in the occupation. That'd be cool. But I feel like I know what the occupation looks like for the most part. But the beginning of it, at like the roll up to it, and what that process looked like, I'm certainly interested in it. Having just watched the motion picture last week, I've always been kind of interested in like what happened to Decker and Ilea in that movie. Like, where did they go? Like, are they just downloaded into this digital? Are they just digitized and that's it? I assume, but I've always, as a little kid, even been like, what happened to them?
Yeah. What did happen?
Yeah. They're 2 little different ideas. One I'm surprised you didn't mention. I thought you were going to, unless you just haven't yet. That we kind of just talked about in a more casual setting, talking about Star Trek, not on live air like this, is those aliens in Conspiracy, those insect guys. Like what happened to them? We watched Conspiracy together a few weeks ago, and that's certainly one that I feel like is a pretty common pick of if you're talking about like what Star Trek stuff would you like to see more of.
Yes, Thad seems to think that the Picard show is going to deal with that, so I'll leave that to Thad's theory.
Yes, they're going to finally come back.
Yep.
Yeah, but Star Trek has no shortage of that. If I spend a lot of time just kind of thinking about introduce, kind of one-off villains and like things like that. You could play in all kinds. That's how these. There's so many Star Trek novels, and a lot of them kind of do the sorts of things we're talking about, like exploring these different ideas, points in the timeline. So there's no shortage of ideas that have already been explored and some that haven't, I'm sure, even in the novels. But as somebody who hasn't taken the leap into a whole lot of Star Trek novels, I'm sure I'm missing some good content that is tackling some of the stuff we're talking about here.
Yeah, and I think just moving forward, as far as Star Trek goes, I think there's no excuse for, like we don't know where to go. There's not enough content there. There's just so much that's been built up over the 50 plus years of Star Trek that I think that it's going to be cool to see down the line, the gaps filled in. So high hopes for the future for sure. Yeah.
John Jones is Tom Riker. He does appear in an episode of Deep Space Nine, and he's captured by the Cardassians, and there was always talk of a sequel coming there that never happened. So yeah, that's an interesting idea. Like, what happened to him? Did he die in custody, or did he
Cardassian prison or somewhere?
Yeah. Probably not a pleasant situation wherever he ended up. But yeah, definitely. I totally echo what you just. I like the idea of kind of doing what Discovery did and what Enterprise did, going back, I'm not somebody that necessarily needs the franchise to constantly just be moving forward and going into unexplored territory. I think half the fun is sometimes going back and filling in those gaps and playing with continuity. I like that stuff. Some people are not so much into that and would prefer the show to just kind of keep moving forward and leave the past. And I respect that for sure. Because doing these kinds of things, as we saw with Discovery and Enterprise, even doing that does lead to challenges, and it's not the easiest thing to do, and it can be a tough needle to thread, and it doesn't always work for people. So I respect the desire to keep moving forward and telling completely fresh stories that don't necessarily have to deal much with this kind of continuity in a real, like, tangible way. But I do like when they do it.
Yeah. Agreed. Do you have any more?
Not really, no.
Yeah.
I pretty much got everything that I wrote down. Like I said, we could go on and on and on. We could kind of go episode by episode.
Yeah.
You could pretty much just start at the beginning and just talk about each episode and talk about different threads that could keep going from each of those, and you could spiderweb out into 1,000 different ideas. John Jones says he loves revisiting the history too. Yeah, totally with you.
Great, John.
But yeah, that's this is just taste. We could certainly do more with an idea like this and talk more specifically about any number of these ideas, or pick one and really try to, like, creatively build it out and figure out what it would all do and mean.
Yeah.
But that would be my quick taste, I guess, of the ones that interest me the most.
Yeah. Do you have any Star Trek content you'd like to mention?
Not really. I'll say I'm going what we left behind tomorrow in the theater. Yeah. So by tomorrow night, I'll see it. Well, I wish.
Yeah.
That's what I don't know if you caught us at the very, very beginning of the stream, but I had asked if Dan knew, because I'm not sure. I can't find any information. Like, when is it publicly available for anybody? I'm definitely curious about that, because I'm sure I'm going to be dying to talk about it in the next week or so on this show. But my instinct is to wait until you've seen it, obviously, to really dive into it. But that I'm sure will come, and I'm sure I'll say a couple things next week after I've seen it. But we'll have a full discussion coming once both of us have seen it and got a chance to digest it a little bit. And,
yeah. I'll mention our Twitters. We're going through a 30-day challenge. Bill is pretty much caught up. I'm still working on it, but I think it's just kind of a fun way to kind of get people active and me active on Twitter with this 30-day challenge on Twitter. I think it might be fun. Maybe after this we could do I know there's Deep Space Nine one. We could do a Voyager TNG one. I think it would be fun to kind of get people involved with a 30-day challenge like that. So yeah, so definitely check out our Twitters.
Yeah, for sure.
I guess we'll start wrapping it up. Bill said it before. I think this is kind of a cool topic to kind of maybe do, since we did like a big picture, maybe do kind of like a narrow focus on one of the ideas, or maybe series specific, if you want to do like missed opportunities for TNG or Deep Space Nine or one of those. I think it would be fun to kind of do. So let us know if you guys want to see that. Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah, I think we pretty much covered like you said, the broad overview of these ideas. But I could totally go into. I would love to go into more detail on any of them and really on one or a few. But I think we accomplished our mission.
Yeah. You guys know the drill. We'll be back next week to talk more Star Trek. Check out our Twitter. I guess Bill's Instagram. Our Facebook page, the Discord channel. We'll see you guys next week.
Yeah. Thanks for watching.